Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Of the Waterman, and it traces the fate of Bailey Craft, who struggles to find his place in the world. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. With the Skipjack Races just around the corner that celebrate the traditions of the Eastern Shore, we thought we'd take a look at a novel that explores the changing landscape for the Waterman. Nancy Taylor Robson is the author, and she is no stranger to life on the water, having spent time working on coastal tugboats, which is recounted in her autobiographical book, Woman in the Wheelhouse. Course of the Waterman centers around Bailey Craft, whose family possess an air of royalty when it comes to crabbing and oystering on the bay. But his life changes with the death of his father and the struggle he faces trying to hold on to his dreams of life on the water. Our in-studio guest is Nancy Taylor Robson, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
And also might mention that the book is also winner of the 2003 Fred Bonney Award as well.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start with actually the setting. Because it's the Elizabeth River. Describe for us where that is, what it looks like, and why you chose that particular location.
It is a stand-in really for the Chester River, and as I wrote the book, I sat with a chart of the Chester, but I didn't want to use the Chester River's name particularly. And I'm familiar with it because I've been up and down it a number of times, and it's close to where we live. So, and I know the people that run it. It was an easy place to do, and it was also, I had all the picture in my head, so when I started to write the thing, I could walk through the streets in my head. I could walk through the territory really easily. I didn't have to make it up.
So describe for us what this area looks like.
It is Chestertown area. It has a number of colonial, it was a colonial port to start with, and it was originally very much a waterman's area. What's his name? The guy who wrote The Lord's Oysters, Gilbert
right.
Byron, yes, lived not far from there and wrote about it. And it's that whole area is very much attached to the water. I mean, we've got the Sultana up there. We have the down rigging that happens up there in the fall. It's very much a piece of how people live, I think. The river does.
And does it just, by the way, encapsulate this trend that we've seen in terms of the decline, say, of the Waterman, the decline, particularly of their tradition or their industry?
Chestertown does less. Rock Hall is much more that kind of place because Rock Hall is still really a waterman's community, and you can see it in the atrophying of the number of boats and all the slips. You can see it. You can see it in Kent Narrows, where it used to be just chock-a-block with all the watermen's boats and the slips, and now it's down to a small percentage. Each place you go, and I've been sailing on the Chesapeake Bay my entire life, and I'm not young anymore, and I can look at it and think what it used to look like when I was a kid, and how you used to hear really early in the morning if you were anchored out in the sailboat that my dad built, that you could hear people, starting up their engines at 3:30 in the morning and putting out to go and work. And I thought, it's changed.
So describe for me a Bailey Craft. He's 17 years old, and his father is Orrin. And he seems to represent this transition from whatever the future is going to be in terms of the Chesapeake Bay and Waterman and his father's tradition.
Yes, I think, actually, I got the character of Bailey is partly set on, my son was in his late teens when I was writing it, but it was really the book was begun because the guy who mowed our lawn at the time was the son of a waterman and the grandson of a waterman, and he was a very gregarious soul, but being out on a lawnmower doesn't give you a lot of conversation, so he would always stop when he finished mowing the lawn, come and knock on the office door. And finally one day, because I know how hard he worked, and I said, why are you doing this? He said, well, my father was a waterman and my grandfather was a waterman, and one day coming up the river, my dad said to me, I don't want you to be a waterman because you can't make a living out here. And I came back inside and sat down and started writing this book.
So describe for me what kind of person he is.
He's principled. He's hardworking. He has the thing about him, I think, particularly being a teenager, is that when you're in your teens and very early 20s, you're starting to try and figure out what your place in the world is, where you actually belong, who your tribe is. And Bailey already thinks he's got that. He knows where he is. He doesn't have to worry about making decisions. He's got the trajectory in his head, and he also knows he's really good at it. And that's a wonderfully belonging sense of your own life. And suddenly his father coming up with the river says, I'm sorry, this is not how it's going to go for you. But when his father, and I'm not giving too much away, I don't think, when his father very early in the book drops dead, suddenly he thinks, oh, it's me to take care of the family. It's me that I have to step into my father's shoes. I know how to do this. I know we've got the boat. I know what I'm going to do. But suddenly he finds out that his father did not leave him the boat. His father had planned for him to go to college, and his mother was on board with that plan, and he left his mother the boat, and she had a different plan for him.
Do you think that as an individual, he didn't appreciate the decline of the industry? Was there a blindness, do you think, maybe of youth, in terms of his view that he could go ahead and continue as his family had done?
I think he thought he could beat the odds because he was that good. And because people always need to eat. There are always going to be people that want to eat fish. And even if it's down to the last few, he's going to be one of those last few because he's just that good. I figured that, I think that's the way he approached it all and wasn't willing to give that up. And then to be thrust into a place where suddenly, you have to completely rethink how you put your feet on the ground and who you are and where your capabilities lie, and maybe they don't lie here at all. What am I going to do? That was it. It was something that I thought so many young people go through, but so many of these watermen are going through, because that kind of knowledge, the sort of knowledge that watermen passed from one generation to the other, is almost in your DNA, almost literally, really. And it's the sort of thing about when the water looks like this, from this angle, at this particular point of the river, you know what to do. It's not something that's easily learned. It's something that you just sort of pick up as so that it's like learning how to ride a bicycle. You can't figure out each one of the steps. You can just do it well.
So now he also has a friend whose name is Booty, and he has a much different, by the way, relationship with his father, Todd, who apparently has been an alcoholic. Describe that relationship, because you seem to really have two different kinds of father-son relationships.
Todd is Booty's father is a very disappointed man. He's worked hard. He's been friends of the family, of the Kraft family, his life. His father and Orrin's father were longtime friends, but he's never quite felt as though he measured up. And his wife left him when Booty was only 4, and left the boy with the father. And he's been angry and hurt about that forever, and basically taken it out on the people that he's close to, which is what a lot of human beings do. And Booty, you asked about how he was. He's somebody that I just loved his character. I loved writing him because he had such generosity of spirit and such optimism and hope for life in general, and for each new encounter with someone was going to bring something good. That's the kind of person that he is, and I've always admired people that can be like that.
Now, you described him after you sort of set these two families up, because on the one hand, I think it made the reference to sort of royalty. I think I stole a phrase there, but which is the main character's family, Bailey, and on the other hand, Booty's family, not so much. Does that reflect, do you think, what those kinds of divisions within the community? I mean, are those kinds of differences between families?
I believe there are, and I believe that there are those kinds of differences between families in all kinds of walks of life. I'm much more familiar with, to be honest, I mean, I am slightly familiar with watermen's families, but I'm much more familiar with tugboaters and commercial mariners. And I have seen a lot of that in that, and I'm assuming that these people, because some of them are in fact from watermen's families. I used to do stories for yachting, in fact, and I can remember having a long conversation with people on Tangier Island, and they were sending their children to work in the Gulf of Mexico or to go to the Navy because they didn't think they could become watermen anymore.
So what do you think this story says about where the state of the Watermen are at this point? I mean, it seems as if in this particular book, they're a community that's in flux, that has maybe one foot out, as it were, with the idea that he might go to college, and yet on the other hand, it's clearly his family still within this very tight community.
Yeah, and I think you've asked a much broader question, which is really, in a way, what started me writing the book as well, because it is, where does this whole industry go? The people that have done this, all these generations, we cannot, when they first started to be able to harvest oysters and crabs mechanically instead of by individual people, that's when it started, to plummet, in addition to the pollution that we've been all party to. So that combination of things, it's all an ecology one way or another. Their lives are an ecology within themselves, is what the things that I hoped I showed in the book itself. But also the lives that we live here, how we interact and how we affect one another are things that we don't necessarily see until we run smack up against it. Your question really was, what about that whole community in influx? And I don't know. I hope, because I tend to be a more optimistic person, and I think I like fish. We need to make sure that, and the fish, everything alive wants to keep living. So if we give it half a chance, maybe it can. But we have to back off and stop thinking of it as bottom line thinking. We have to think of it in terms of broader line thinking and long-term thinking. And once it's sort of a build it and they will come. If in fact the harvest gets better, if in fact we figure out how to put this together really well, then I think there will be more watermen, because they used to be able to earn a really good living. And being within that kind of a tight-knit community has its ups and downs, certainly, but when you know where you are, and there's one piece of the book that I think shows how closely knit the community is, even if you don't like someone, you'll go and help.
Now, as a matter of fact, when you describe these scenes, I mean, some of them are as a matter of fact, some are very technical, I guess, in nature, and yet you write about them. At one particular, in which Bailey described, he says, as he watched the shadow rose from the dark water and came into focus, sharpening into olive shell and blue-green claws that clung to a frayed gray eel chunk tied to the line. And when the crab broke the surface, Bailey leaned out, scooped it up, and dumped it into the bushel at his feet. I mean, how did you go out a lot with Waterman? What kind of background did you have to kind of capture that sense that you might have if you were really out there?
I have trout lined.
Okay, good. Well, that's the first order of business.
Yeah, I have trout lined. Not bunches, but just twice. Yeah. but I paid close attention at the time. I mean, when you get food, you pay close attention, but also being on the water as long as I have. It all of it impacts, I think, and I've loved being on the water. I remember my mother saying at one point, I was sailboat racing with a friend, and she said, I didn't know you were back from where you were gone, and until I saw you cross the line at the helm of that boat. And she said, you look like you're completely at home. That's the way I feel when I'm on the water, is completely at home. Of course, I'm not that thrilled about storms. I do, in fact, when I go offshore, get seasick periodically, but you keep working through it. But the water has had a huge impact on me and on my life. My husband's a mariner. My daughter's a mariner. So, it's something I feel very closely connected to.
I mean, in many ways, it seems like a very hard life.
I think it is
very
hard.
Tough work.
It's very tough work. It's very physically demanding. It can break you down physically in a fairly short period of time, relatively. I mean, if you look at a guy that has been out there tonging his entire life at 50 versus someone that's been in an office and had to go play, racquetball, and put the pair of them beside each other, they look 10 years at least apart often.
I mean, you describe, for instance, about people particularly who tong and that kind of thing, but that their upper bodies look much, much different than, say, anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
huge. Well, my brother-in-law, in fact, used to we've been out tonging with him. He used to be a waterman, and we were out from Cambridge at one point. He had a boat out there, and we went, it was either Thanksgiving Day or Christmas Day, I think, and went out with him in this unbelievable fog to go and tong. And I thought, okay, I was culling a little bit on the backboard there, but my husband and he were up there using the tongs, and I thought, man, this is hard work. So you can watch, and he had a huge, I mean, he's slightly changed shape now, but he had an enormous chest as opposed to everything else that was, holding him up. So...
Now, getting back to the novel, so this relationship that exists now between Bailey and Booty, I mean, after Bailey's father dies, it is a very strained relationship. Tell us a little bit about that. Even though they tend to save one another and they kind of work together in many ways when they're working with this boat, but there's still this tension, as if Booty is somehow stealing away Bailey's dream.
Well, that's the way Bailey feels, is that he is stealing his dream. I mean, they had always been best friends. Bailey had never thought very deeply about it. It was just an assumption. And Booty, always being the very upbeat person he was, Bailey sort of took it all for granted. But when Bailey's father died and he no longer has the boat, he suddenly realizes that Booty could potentially be competition for what he wants. And Booty goes to his mother and goes to Bailey's mother and says, how about you and I go into partnership? And because she wants Bailey to go to college, which is something Bailey does not want to do, but his parents had really set him up in that direction. He feels betrayed by Booty.
And also, we can't go without at least mentioning Sis.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about
her.
this. I mean, she's real, like,
she's a little
out
pistol.
There. That's right.
She's a little pistol. I just love Sis. I think she's one of my favorite people, and she's only 9. But she's got the heart of a lion, that kid, and she is determined and smart and knows what partnership is, and she's not afraid to call somebody on it when they've really put their toes over the line. And she's absolutely with the whole family. And one of the things I loved about being able to write her was when she had to go out. Emma, Bailey's mother, got a job after his dad died to try and make sure that he wasn't going to think he was going to be the man of the house. And she said, and Sis is going out with you, because it was the summertime. And he was all annoyed about it. But Sis got on board, and he suddenly began to look at her and realized how smart she was, and also that she was part of the craft heritage too. And he could see when she was looking around and the questions that she was asking, that she had that in her blood somehow. I mean, she had never been out with her father, but she still had that. And he also realized that he had all those stories and all that. The Kraft family jewels were the stories. And he had all those stories that he had, that he could either share them with her to share the family jewels, or he could hoard them. And when he saw how interested that she was in everything that was going on and being there, and he could see that she really would just drink it in, then he started to share, and that really that began to cement a partnership between the two of them.
Even as she goes out, continues with Bailey, it almost seems as if it drains a certain amount of it. I mean, it really takes its toll on her.
Terribly,
it really wears her down.
Mm-hmm. Well, she's working so hard to hold up her end of things. She's a very conscientious person. And she's just a little bit of a thing when they first start.
Right.
At 9 years old, not huge.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, and also needs more sleep, and didn't get it if they're going to go out together the way they are. So, yeah, she's struggling, but she's not about to give up.
Now, one of the other things that obviously Booty takes the boat out, and they're looking for Booty on the boat. And it's winter, I guess, is what it is, and with these
Thanksgiving
sheets.
Day, but it's sleeting. Yeah, it's a terrible storm.
And you say running between the tree-lined shores, the storm seemed to be containable, manageable. Wind and sleet pelted them on the starboard side, and Bailey pulled his collar up further to keep the icy water from running down his neck. The houses and docks were almost visible in the gray outline, even from the center of the narrow creek. The top was short, barely white-capped. And is this how, I know when we talked about in an earlier interview, you worked out in the extreme cold. Is this something you derive from your own experience there?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Ice is no fun.
Especially in the water, huh?
Especially in the water, yes. It's no fun. I mean, it just seeps right into your bones and stays with you. It's very hard. Once you get that cold, it's very hard to get warm again.
So what is that like? I mean, being out like that. And obviously, in this particular case, they're searching for somebody. But just in general, if you're out there on the water in an icy condition like that, I mean, it seems dangerous. It's certainly uncomfortable, to say the least. But it sounds as if it almost would be unbearable.
It's extremely dangerous. And I can tell you that the only time I really thought I might lose my life was, and it's something I recount in the other book, Woman in the Wheelhouse, was when we had gone down to the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay in a March storm, and it was blowing 70 north. And we went down sleeting, and it was just bitter cold. To pick up a barge, it was really too big for us. And as we were going back north up there, we were getting more and more covered with ice, and I could feel the tug not coming back when she was, she'd roll and roll and roll, but when she wasn't coming back when she was supposed to, I'm thinking, uh-oh. And it was the one night I normally, as a cook and deckhand, I normally slept down when it was rough on the lower deck. My husband was the captain. When he wouldn't come down and say goodnight to me before he went off, right after he went off watch, I thought something was wrong. And that night was the only night he had ever not done that. And I thought, yep, we're going to die. So yes, terrifying, and it builds up and builds up. And in fact, there was a family in of Waterman. I can't remember the exact details, but I can remember they came out of not far out of here some years ago, and they think what had happened was that they got a big haul, and they got overloaded with ice, and they had one wave too many, and they all went down. And it wasn't, it took a long time before they found them, and it was terrible.
Mm. Now, one of the other sort of odd bits, because there's sort of these small items, I think, in the book, but one is where when doing the search out for Bailey, he ultimately wants Bailey winds up encountering his family, who apparently is sort of a second home. It's all nice and cozy. There seems almost a certain class resentment as he watches them have a very nice place.
Exactly, and I did it on purpose. There is, we need to be aware of the fact that in this country, are class divisions. There just are. And if you don't acknowledge them, then you don't pay any attention to them. It's not that it's not more porous than it is in some places. But I think that understanding the difference between those tribes, and we all are tribes, is a mistake. Because then you can't communicate amongst them. If you don't understand the differences, then it's very hard to communicate.
There's this big difference. Bailey almost seems to resent them. And they offer him comfort. They offer him
comfort, and they were very kind and all of that. But it's just looking around and thinking what ease they looked like they lived with, and what hardship he lived with, and the unfairness of life in general. And some of that had to do with just accident of birth. But he was 17, and you don't think through every single piece of that when you're 17. It's just, it felt wrong. All of it felt wrong to him at the time.
Now, the other contrast, of course, is that when they are looking for him, you've got a whole set of boats who are out there trying to make sure that nobody gets lost as they get out. And there seems with a certain leader, I guess, as a leader of the group, as it were, or at least is coordinating this. And it's like this community has gone out, even in this very terrible weather.
Mm-hmm.
Is that typical, you think, of this community, that they've been band together like that, even in the face of some kind of danger like that?
I think that's true. I cannot give you a specific example of that. I watch, for example, down in Rock Hall, and I say down just because of where we live in relationship to it, that when anyone has any trouble, the whole community bands together, and they raise money, and they put things in the bulletin boards and stuff. And it doesn't matter how you felt about the family. You put your hand in.
Because, as a matter of fact, one of the things that I've observed, particularly with skipjacks, is that there are a number of people. I think it was when there's a couple of boats that had been taken out of the water, had problems, and they were now going to put them back in a couple of years, but there seemed like this whole community that came along and would help out one piece or another in terms of repairing these boats. That
that's
seems
lovely.
to be,
yeah, but it's not surprising to me because it's a small community, and you want to have your tribe intact. Even if you feel competitive, even with the races, and the ones that want to win. However, they want everybody else there to win against.
Yeah, they seem to at least take some of their time to help each out.
Absolutely,
in that sense.
Yeah, and it's important to keep everything going. It's like living in a very small town. If one place goes, you've got to figure out, we're smaller, we're less than we were. So you really need to go and help.
By the way, speaking of skipjack races, what do you make of where the skipjacks are in terms of their tradition and so on? There's a number that I guess about 12 or 13, I think they've been refurbished, and there's this whole effort. I know Stony Whitelock is leading the charge. I know he has the Catherine. What do you make of that effort?
I'm glad to see it, because I think that when we lose pieces of our history, particularly the kind of history that has to do with the Chesapeake and the physical work, people, now we're so comfortable in our lives. And you lose the understanding of how hard people have worked and what they've sacrificed and what seemed to be a normal day of really, really hard work. And you come home and you have to then light the fire because there's no heat. Each one of those pieces are things that we need to understand in a visceral kind of a way as well as just an intellectual way. And I think keeping things like the skipjacks alive and at least having some small connection with them helps us to understand those things. Otherwise, we get so, we get just jaded about everything.
Those traditions certainly disappear.
Oh, completely. But it's almost more than that. I mean, I think about the people that first came to this country, that built this country, when there was nothing. You're hacking down trees to build houses, and you're hacking down trees, and then you're having to take the bark off, and then you're, just to build a house, just to build a boat, the log canoes, just to build a boat. These are all the things that you do, and the kinds of effort that you have to put in just to live and then to make things go forward is something that I think we lose if we lose those traditions. Also, because we're maritime and because we're so connected to the Chesapeake here, we've got 11,000 miles of shoreline approximately here. It's important for us to understand how important it is to us about what the water is, how we got where we are now, what we need, where we really maybe need to be, and how we might be able to get there.
So what has been the reception to this book? I mean, obviously you wrote it some time back, and do you see it contributing to that kind of awareness?
I do. I have to tell you, I reread it for the first time again last night, and I've had the people that have read it. It's been interesting to me because it's been sort of a soup to nuts. It's been kids, teenagers, men, women. One friend of mine got hold of me a couple of years after. He hadn't read the book until a couple of years after it came out. And he said, "You saved my life last winter." He said, "I was just struggling with depression. And I got up in the middle of the night and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a copy of your book and I hadn't read it yet." And he said, "I just sat down and read the whole thing through." He said, "You just sort of pulled me out of it." And I'm not sure exactly why or how that hit him, but maybe it was the contrast between what this kid was going through or the parallels and what he was going through and how it was still going to come back up again. It's going to be okay.
So you're going to write another novel about the...
I am, in fact, working on the sequel to this, yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So I've got about 300 pages written. We'll see.
And Booty and Bailey
we
and
continue.
the kids?
Yeah, we continue. Yeah, and Sis is still there, and she's getting older, and, Tud is still there, and Emma's still there, and life changes, and figuring out where to go, what the next step should be is interesting work.
We've been speaking with Nancy Taylor Robson. She is, of course, the author of the book, The Course of the Waterman. It's a novel. It centers around Bailey Craft, who was about 17 years old, and his father dies, as we remind you, and he's trying to find his place in the world. And we appreciate you stopping by and talking with us.
Thank you so much.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, view the daily times, or visit pac14.org.